tired, and then when he makes me Loring, I always go like this. And I said, Ed, can you please make me somebody other than Loring so you can hold your maps up? Okay, folks, let's get back on the bus and we'll get you back to Vicksburg right around 5.
You want to take some pictures of it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that one's put up there. That's the original stone in the back. Put up in just recently by
Judge. Cool.
He seldom ever had his wife with him. He always kept her back home with her wife's family.
Just like now, that story sounds familiar. When we went to Mary Tom Lincoln's house and we went to a cemetery, and there was a guy there who kept going off to warn his wife would keep the house, and she built the plantation up and it made money and everything, and then he came back and didn't want her anymore. She did all that work.
It's been a while since I've read on Van Dorn, but I think Van Dorn got married right before he left.
Oh yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
So he's gone for the entire conflict of the Mexican War, and when he came back, he stayed away from his wife, I think, for 2 years, traveling about, accepting the adulation of Mississippians for his actions during the Mexican War.
So he was like praised. It was like, just to say, oh, I was with him. Like I said.
I think Van Dorn was married from himself.
We're with Ed Barr, so.
Well, Dan said the same thing that Dr. Hughes did.
Oh, I know who it was, Carl.
Didn't he? Well, he killed his
two pros on when it first started. I think it was the news and Bob K or somebody, or funny clickers and stuff like that.
Did you get a picture of that?
Yeah.
There's 2 flags in there.
And that's
28th Mississippi Cavalry and the Sweats Battery.
No, I sure didn't.
Did you get one before you go?
Photograph? You mean a photograph or video? Or photograph, you mean? Or?
Can you do a photograph?
Yeah, I think so.
Would you do it for me?
Yeah, the 2 flags?
Yeah. 3 flags. If you can do all 3.
Yeah.
I'll owe you.
Yeah.
diligently to maintain to a very high standard the resources entrusted to our care on your behalf. And so I was at a meeting on a cemetery wall and reconstruction of our national cemetery wall. Well, today we have an exciting day for you. Our first stop today is going to be Raymond Battlefield. Actually, we're going to be making a few stops between now and then. But we're going to take up a Grant's line of march. Well, those brakes sound like mine. We're going to take up on Grant's line of march deep into the interior of Mississippi. We'll certainly make one stop at the Dillon Plantation site, which is land recently acquired by the National Park Service that is going to be attached to the Natchez Trace Parkway. Although it is land affiliated with the Vicksburg Campaign, they had the legislation that could readily accept the property. We did not, so they accepted it, and we're going to help interpret it. We'll then stop at Raymond Battlefield, a few stops on that particular field. We'll have some lunch there, and then head over to Champion Hill and spend the afternoon at Champion Hill and Big Black River Bridge. So we're going to be about an hour ahead of Ed, which is nice. Throughout the course of the day, don't forget, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. I have some information on the 59th Indiana. Not as much as I would like to have gotten for you due to the meeting I had, but let me give you what I have, and I'll get some more for you in the morning, okay?
Harriet, there's another chair. You brought another chair with us.
Yeah, and I brought the...
Oh, okay.
like you. Yes, indeed.
Remember Kevin Greavy?
Oh, yeah.
He and I shared not a room, but we were on the same floor of the dorm together. He was a freshman at that time.
Terry
Something like that. I'm not sure what all he do, but he's going to be in our wake today.
I think so.
Folks, this is how we are oriented. And again, anytime we stop, I'll try to have these maps oriented the way we are facing. We have come from Vicksburg down what is today called Highway 27, crossing the Big Black River here at Baldwin's Ferry, and we are now located right where the historic town of Auburn was situated during the course of the Civil War. There's nothing left of the town of Auburn today other than the cemetery, which is just down the road here a short distance. Now you note on this map, and as you drive through this area, towns such as Cayuga, Auburn, Utica. Do these names sound familiar to any of you at all? They are certainly names from New York State, aren't they? This gives you an idea of the sentiment of some of the people out in this area. Most of your small dirt farmers in this region were pro-Union in their sympathy. It's important to remember that in 1860, that the people of Vicksburg and Warren County voted against secession. There were two counties in Mississippi that voted against secession. Warren County, of which Vicksburg is the county seat, and Adams County, of which Natchez, the city's largest state, is the county seat. And of course these people were voting their economic interests. They realized that if secession came, followed by a war, that traffic on the Mississippi River would cease, bringing economic calamity to their communities. And so for economic reasons, more than anything else, they voted against secession. But out here in the countryside, you have a lot of small dirt farmers that have come in here from Pennsylvania, New York, and other northern states that are pro-Union in their sympathy. Thus, as the Union Army is pushing inland in the interior of Mississippi, they are actually gleaning a great deal of valuable intelligence from these people. Now you'll note on this map, the Mississippi River is off to the west here, Vicksburg off to the north. As Grant crosses the Mississippi River down here at Bruinsburg and fights the Battle of Port Gibson, he does cross Bayou Pierre at Grindstone Ford and pushes up to the line of the Big Black River in the vicinity of Hankinson's Ferry. He will capture the bridge across the Big Black River at Hankinson's Ferry, send a few troops across as a feint against Vicksburg. Now many people who come to Vicksburg and study this campaign often wonder, why didn't Grant just take the most direct road to Vicksburg? Now you recall that area yesterday, driving south from Vicksburg in the rainstorm, we went over ridge after ridge after ridge, which provides the Confederates with opportunity after opportunity after opportunity for strong defensive positions. You recall, what is Grant's paramount objective here once he crosses the river? It's not so much to capture Vicksburg as quickly as possible, because he knows if he moves into this narrow triangle of land, he's going to have the Mississippi on his left, the Big Black River on his right and rear, which is going to limit his mobility and his ability to maneuver. It's also going to limit his artillery, his use of artillery, which right now the Union Army has superiority of. So he's going to minimize some of his key advantages by moving into this narrow triangle of land. But by moving into this triangle of land, if he is unable, for whatever reason, to make a rapid push and capture Vicksburg, the entire time this rail line is going to be open. That's the Southern Railroad of Mississippi that connects Vicksburg with Jackson, and via Jackson points elsewhere in the Confederacy. It will enable his opponent, Confederate General John Pemberton, to have an open line of supply and communication, over which he can bring in additional reinforcements of troops and supplies of munition, food, clothing, medicine, etc. Yes, sir?
How do you know about the geography of that land?
Not only by maps, but also by intelligence he is gaining from slaves and other people in this area, whites who are pro-Union in their sympathy.
So perhaps he might have done that if he didn't know about this, you think?
No, I think Grant would have known anyway. Many of his officers had traversed the Mississippi River and were familiar with this area somewhat. But it's also important to bear in mind that Grant has a keen sense of the advantages to be derived by the local populace. As Grant is pushing inland into Mississippi, he is asking black and white alike, where does this road go? Where are the Confederates? Where are their troop concentration supply depots, etc.? He's gleaning as much information from these individuals as he possibly can. At the same time, as he's pushing into Mississippi, he's asking these people who are of pro-Southern sympathy. And these unionists who are out here in the county say, well, Mr. Smith and Mr. Jones, these are pure secession. As a result, Grant will post guards at each of these homes as his columns are pushing forward to keep the people locked in their house, if you will, to prevent them from running off into the darkness or through the woods and informing the Confederates where the Federals are, what their troop strength is, how many cannon they have, what roads they are on, what direction they're marching, and so on. So while Grant is gleaning a tremendous amount of information that he's utilizing for his benefit, he is depriving his opponent, John Pemberton, of that exact same type of information. Pemberton, you recall, has sent off the bulk of his cavalry in this useless chase of Ben Grierson. Pemberton does not have much cavalry available for his use in scouting purposes, and what he does have, he does not utilize properly. So rather than be gleaning information, he is groping in the dark, and in some cases, he has no idea exactly where the Union Army is. So Grant will push up this narrow corridor, this watershed that separates the line of the Big Black from Bayou Pierre, thus using those bodies of water to protect his flank. Now it's also important as we begin our discussion of the campaign today. We'll see this is the situation between May 2nd and May 5th. You can see the Union feint here at Hankinson's Ferry, trying to keep Pemberton's attention riveted south of Vicksburg. You can see that John Pemberton as well is beginning a concentration of his forces, and by so doing he has yielded the initiative to Grant. With victory at Port Gibson behind him, Grant continues on with the momentum and the initiative. Pemberton, on the other hand, is perfectly willing to yield that initiative to Grant, and he begins a consolidation of his forces in the vicinity of Vicksburg. Continuing on, here is the situation then between May 6th and 7th of 1863. We can see the Federal forces are moving into this area here, paralleling the Big Black, keeping their left flank on the Big Black River, but marching up this corridor along this very road here toward Auburn, where we're now standing. Let's take a look at the role of his subordinates at this time. You recall there are 3 Army Corps in Grant's army: the 13th Corps under McClernand, the 15th Corps under Sherman, the 17th Corps under McPherson. It is the 13th Corps that has led the march down the west side of the river, followed by James McPherson's 17th Corps. The 15th Corps under Sherman has been left behind to put up these demonstrations and these feints, deceive the enemy into thinking the entire Union Army is still there. Once Grant has crossed the Mississippi River, and in particular after he has won the Battle of Port Gibson, he calls Sherman to hasten his march and join the army just as rapidly as he can. Grant does not want to push deep into Mississippi with only 2 of his 3 Army Corps. Rather, he wants his entire force concentrated. So Sherman, in a very rapid push, will move from Milliken's Bend and Young's Point down that road they had created on the west side of the river. They will cross the river here to Grand Gulf and move inland, joining up with the army here in this area of Rocky Springs. With all 3 corps now united, around May the 7th, Grant will begin this inland campaign, and it will be a fairly rapid push. Now, the assignments of his 3 corps commander at this time: 13th Corps under John McClernand, it's interesting to point out, happens to be the largest corps in the army. He will put McClernand on his left flank with instructions to hug the Big Black River. Sherman, with the 15th Corps, will be in the center in that vital swing position, where he could either swing to the left to assist McClernand should he run into trouble, or swing to the right to assist James McPherson. And way out on the Union right is going to be the troops of the 17th Army Corps under James McPherson. McClernand is a former Democratic member of the Congress. He is not a trained military man, yet we've already seen that he has been given a key assignment in leading the Army's van down the west side of the river. Now he's given another key assignment of being on the federal left closest to the enemy, the point of contact. Now, do you trust the point of contact to somebody in whom you have no confidence? Do you trust the point of contact to somebody in whose ability you doubt? As Grant writes in his memoirs, I don't think so. Again, I think that the actions here at Vicksburg belie that fact. I think it is a safe assumption to say that contrary to what Grant writes after the Civil War, here in the spring and summer of 1863, he has confidence in John McClernand. Although he despises the man personally, he has a healthy respect for his combat abilities and has great confidence that this general can fight independently if need be. So here John McClernand is on the left, at the point of contact. And he will continue on this left flank the entire course of this inland campaign. In the center will be William Sherman, Grant's most trusted subordinate officer. You recall that William T. Sherman is a graduate of the United States Military Academy at West Point. He was in the upper third of his class. He is not a veteran of the Mexican War, however. Sherman sits out the entire Mexican War in California, sees no action whatsoever. Disgruntled with Army life, he leaves the Army in the 1850s, much as did Grant, and he bounces from one job to another, to another, to another. Finally, just prior to the outbreak of the American Civil War, he is a college president in Pineville, Louisiana, and is president of the school that is today known as LSU. When he is called upon by the governor of the state to furnish troops for the Southern Confederacy, Sherman resigns his presidency, returns to his wife's native city, St. Louis, Missouri, and there offers to enlist in the Federal Army. He is appointed colonel of the 13th United States Infantry, which is a regular Army unit recently approved by the Congress, and so he will be the first colonel of that distinguished unit. Later on, Phil Sheridan also becomes colonel of the 13th Infantry, and for that reason, if you take a look at the unit's crest today, on that crest there are two shoulder straps with 4 stars on it, indicative of Sherman and Sheridan, the two full generals that had been former commanders of the 13th Infantry. Sherman will rise through the ranks fairly rapidly, but in so doing, you recall, he has a nervous breakdown. He's called crazy by the members of the press, and he's removed from his command and put on the shelf for a while. But he's taken off the shelf in time for the Battle of Shiloh. He will perform admirably at Shiloh, and there he will befriend Ulysses S. Grant. And once you've befriended Grant, you are a friend of Grant's forever and always. Grant demonstrated tremendous loyalty to his friends regardless of the situation. He always stood by them through thick or thin. Even if they did not warrant his trust, he gave them undying loyalty. And here he would provide undying loyalty to Sherman, and Sherman would become his closest confidant and personal friend. During the Vicksburg Campaign, Sherman will command the 15th Army Corps. He will be in the center, and as Grant's most trusted subordinate, be given that swing position. Again, swing to the left to assist McClernand if need be, or to the right to assist McPherson if need be. And way out on the Federal right flank, farthest from the point of contact, is Grant's youngest and most inexperienced subordinate officer, James McPherson. Now, McPherson is a graduate of the United States Military Academy, class of 1852, first in his class. So he's a highly skilled and well-trained engineer. But in the pre-war period, he does some engineering work, does some instructing at the point, gains no field experience whatsoever. He will be appointed as an engineering officer on Grant's staff, but in a short 14-month period, he will go from a staff position as an engineer, a lieutenant, all the way to a line position up through the grades to major general in 14 months. That's a pretty meteoric rise, isn't it? So meteoric, in fact, I would suggest to you that he does not acquire or develop the skills necessary to warrant the command he now has. And I think during the course of this campaign, McPherson's inexperience is demonstrated time and time again, and I think Grant, knowing of McPherson's inexperience, recognizing the general's deficiencies, tries to keep him out of harm's way at all times. Consequently, it will be McPherson who will follow in the wake of the 13th Corps down the west side of the river. It will be McPherson who crosses in the wake of the 13th Corps, the Mississippi River, and it will be young James McPherson way out on the Army's right flank, hopefully farthest removed from any contact with the enemy. But as fate would cruelly dictate, it will be James McPherson who will open up the next engagement of the Vicksburg Campaign in the village of Raymond, just down the road. From here we're going to follow the route of Grant's advance. Now Grant, of course, is advancing on a fairly narrow front but on parallel roads. Sherman and McPherson's corps will come down this road here. McPherson in the lead, followed by William T. Sherman. The 17th Corps under James McPherson is on the very next road to our right, which is today known as the Natchez Trace Parkway. And he will march from Port Gibson to Utica and then on toward the village of Raymond. Just beyond this intersection here, which is where the historic town of Auburn was situated, we will come to New Auburn. And it is in the vicinity of New Auburn that the 13th Corps will begin to break off, continuing to parallel the Big Black River to the north. And the idea, once they get to the vicinity of New Auburn and Auburn, they will begin this swinging motion toward the rail line. Here's the Big Black River. Again, the idea is to get on this line from Old Auburn, New Auburn, all the way to Raymond, where the 17th Corps will be destined to march. Once they get on that road, parallel to one another, the idea is to then turn the Army due north, get astride this railroad somewhere in the vicinity between Edwards and Bolton, Mississippi, destroy that rail line, cut them off, and kill them. Cut them off and kill them. Jackson, contrary to most popular accounts of the Vicksburg Campaign, is not Grant's objective and will not become Grant's objective until the battle, following the Battle of Raymond. And we'll discuss that once we get on the field of battle. Yes, sir, question?
Trying to figure this. So McClernand is at the very top.
McClernand will be here on the left, correct?
So if he is on the left flank, you are actually, okay, so the point, the vector point of the force is going southeast?
No, it's going northeast like this. Northeast like this.
Okay, so they're doing a swing like that?
Correct. They'll be doing a swing, just like this, and up to the railroad. Okay?
Sure, Raymond's well, there's
Raymond is over
They're
here.
planning to go west of Raymond.
Yeah.
Southern
I'm sorry.
They're planning to go west of Raymond. If they knew what Raymond
Well, the 17th Corps, McPherson's command, coming from Port Gibson, will go through Utica, then up along this road here to Raymond. And here, he'll be on the right. McClernand will be in this vicinity here, Sherman in the center, and go straight north.
Yeah.
Okay?
I guess I'm having trouble figuring out this left flank because I guess I'm thinking everybody's kind of positioned in such a way that it's kind of like a wagon wheel spin.
Correct.
Okay.
Just like a door closing, with the 13th Corps being the hinge, McPherson way out here where the door handle would be, closing like that.
What road is Sherman coming up?
Sherman is coming up this road here, through Cayuga to Auburn.
Following McClernand?
Just beyond, following,
okay.
Exactly, following McClernand. Just beyond this road here, which is at Auburn,
right.
The 13th Corps will begin turning north.
Okay.
Sherman will continue straight on that road, through Dillon's plantation, toward Raymond.
Okay.
Okay.
And then McPherson's
And
coming up
McPherson's
Natchez
coming
Trail.
way up this road
Okay.
here.
I didn't know if there was
At our
three.
very next stop, I'll have a continuation of these maps showing more of this wide front and the different roads these corps are on, making that swinging motion. Okay?
Grant's objective at this point is going to be the railroad.
The railroad.
Wherever he hits it.
Correct. He wants to hit it somewhere between Edwards and Bolton. Ideally, the most effective way of destroying this railroad would be to destroy the bridge over the Big Black River. You knock out that bridge, you've knocked out this railroad permanently. But Grant assumes, and correctly so, that this bridgehead is going to be strongly guarded by the Confederates, and indeed it is. Consequently, he wants to avoid confrontation with the enemy at that point because the enemy is of unknown strength. He has no idea what the size and scope and the extent of their fortifications may be, so he wants to hit it out in this open country.
Where is Grant during all this? Where's Grant
Where's Grant at all this? Grant will be initially accompanying William Sherman. Now you recall on May the 3rd, Grant is in Grand Gulf. He takes a bath and changes his clothes for the first time in months. After that, he begins moving inland, first of all toward Willows, and then on to Rocky Springs. Once Sherman's corps rejoins the Army, Grant will accompany William Sherman. So General Grant himself will ride down this very road off to our side here. He will continue on with Sherman, establish his headquarters here at the Dillon Plantation on the night of May the 12th. On the night of May the 13th, his headquarters will be in Raymond. On the night of the 14th, he'll be in Clinton. So Grant will accompany William Sherman. William Sherman, why? He likes Sherman. Now he likes McPherson as well, but McPherson's just too far removed, and Grant, distrustful, so to speak, of McClernand, doesn't want to get too far from him. Okay? But he likes to travel with Sherman because the two men get along so well together.
Where did Grierson, where was his damage that he did to the
Where was Grierson's damage? Way off this map here. It's in between, it's right at a place called Newton Station, which is, I guess that may be about 20 miles west of Meridian. So it's all the way over on the east side of the state of Mississippi.
But they were feeling it.
Okay, he wanted to avoid the Jackson area. Now also Meridian is a large Confederate area. Now the town itself only had about 300 people in Meridian at the outbreak of the Civil War, but during the war itself it had several thousands because it became a Confederate supply area. They built numerous structures there for leather goods, construction of wagons, ordnance supplies, railroad depots and repair shops and so on. So thousands of people moved into the area simply due to the jobs created by the military complex. So Sherman wants to avoid Meridian because he figures it's strongly defended. He also wants to avoid Jackson, which is the state capital, because he figures it's strongly defended as well. He wants to go somewhere in that void in between. So he hits the railroad at Newton Station. And there were virtually the only thing in Newton was some Confederate hospitals that the inmates were moved out and the buildings were destroyed.
But Vicksburg was already feeling the pinch by that hit.
Vicksburg's feeling the pinch economically due to the closure of the river, but once this railroad is cut, it cuts off all supply and communications for several days. Now, the damage done by Grierson, by and large, is superficial. By and large, is superficial. His troopers just don't have the luxury of time. After all, he knows Confederates are closing in from all directions on him. He's been on the road since the 17th day of April. On April 24th, he hits the railroad. That's 7 days. So 7 days he's riding very hard with his men, and he knows the Confederates are aware of his path of approach, and so they're closing in on him. Not wishing to be caught there at Newton to do it, and while he does an effective job of cutting the railroad, he destroys some railroad cars and engines, tears up some tracks, sends troopers down the tracks to destroy culverts and water towers, things of that nature. But again, the damage is superficial. It does close the road for a period of several days, but the Confederates very quickly have that road open again for traffic. Now Grant is unaware that Grierson has made it to Newton Station. Even if he has, he does not have any idea what type of extent of damage has been done to this railroad, and Grant doesn't want to take any chances. Thus, once he crosses the Mississippi, he wants to ensure that this line of supply and communication is destroyed so that he can in turn destroy his enemy Pemberton. Cut him off and kill him. Cut him off and kill him. Always remember that. Okay? Grant is ruthless in that regard. Any other questions at this point? Very well, let's continue on. Next stop will be Dillon Plantation.
Having pushed through the village of Old Auburn, now the 13th Corps, led by General John McClernand in the van, will push on to New Auburn, where he will begin a northward movement, again paralleling the Big Black River, and Sherman will take the lead on this road. We're fast approaching New Auburn, and I'll point out the Telegraph Road, as it was called back in those days, the road over which McClernand's Corps would head north. Okay, and it's a shame we didn't have time yesterday to take the road in between Fort Gibson and here. But see how the country, the change in the country from that rugged area that we saw at Fort Gibson with the deep ravines and the cut up topography to a more gentle, open, rolling countryside, open fields. And so around May the 8th of 1863, John McClernand's 13th Army Corps would take this road to the north. As his divisions move off to our left, then the elements of the 15th Corps, led by William Sherman, will continue pushing straight forward. Here's the Telegraph Road. The Telegraph Road, by the way, will lead all the way on up into the village of Edwards, and that's where the Battle of Champion Hill is fought on May the 16th. Due to McClernand's push up the Telegraph Road, Confederate forces safeguarding the Big Black River Bridge will push across that stream and come down the middle road to form as a roadblock against McClernand's advance. But again, we'll talk more about that as we approach Edwards later today. We're continuing on then along the route of march of the 15th Army Corps, led by Major General William T. Sherman. It is along this road that the Army commander himself, General Grant, is also moving. After the 13th Corps turns north, the 15th Corps continues in a northeasterly direction and will bivouac at New Auburn on the night of May the 11th. With New Auburn, very similar to Old Auburn, about the only thing left of it is a cemetery back in the woods. You'll also see an occasional cistern back in the woods, indicative of the old house that used to be there. That's always a lot of fun to look back at these roads and finding those types of traces and actually pinpoint a specific location. Now, you recall from our discussion yesterday that throughout the winter of 1862-1863, the Union Army of the Tennessee, while it's in Louisiana, is plagued by too much water. It's flooded, inundated. All the bayous are out of their banks, overflowing the farm fields. Once they cross the Mississippi side of the river and get up onto the high ground, water becomes rather scarce. And for the first several weeks in May of 1863, there is no rainfall in this part of Mississippi. Unlike we had yesterday, there was no rainfall whatsoever. So these roads are ribbons of dust, and they raise stifling clouds of dust as they march along the road that blinds them, chokes them, makes it difficult to breathe. And it's easy to see that the route of march each and every day, the distance marched is dependent solely on the next available source of water. And so the Union Army, once in Mississippi, is moving from water source to water source to water source. The next water source for Sherman happened to be here at New Auburn. And where this road comes in on our left is the location of New Auburn. You'll see shortly after we pass this intersection, we'll be crossing a creek. That would be the source of water for these troops unless they bivouac here on the night of May the 11th. So this is New Auburn, and here is the water source, and the federal troops of the 15th Corps would be bivouacked on either side of this road, just about as far as the eyes could see in either direction. On the morning of May the 12th, the 15th Corps is instructed to march on Raymond, as are the troops of the 17th Army Corps. Once they reach Raymond, then they'll turn north and head toward the railroad. As the troops move out of their encampment here on the morning of May the 12th, they will hear the sound of firing off to their right front. That's the sounds of the Battle of Raymond that will be fought between John Gregg's Confederate Brigade and James McPherson's 17th Union Army Corps. By this time period of the siege, of the campaign, John Pemberton, the Confederate commander in Vicksburg, has discerned Grant's intention. He realizes that Grant is going to strike for the Southern Railroad in Mississippi, and he decides to attempt to block his efforts. Thus, on May the 12th, John Pemberton will take advantage of the most prominent geographic feature in this area, namely 14 Mile Creek, move his troops into position along 14 Mile Creek with the initial intentions of blocking Grant's advance. And so on May the 12th, McClernand's corps will be engaged at Whittaker's Ford and at Montgomery's Bridge on 14 Mile Creek. Sherman's corps advancing along this road will encounter Confederate resistance at 14 Mile Creek at Dillon's Plantation, and farther to our right on 14 Mile Creek will be the Battle of Raymond. Now on May the 12th, the Sherman's troops are marching down this road just as we are doing. You'll note ahead of us we're going to go underneath the Natchez Trace Parkway. The road will start bending to our left. As they begin rounding this curve, suddenly they can see in the distance sunlight gleaming off of brightly polished rifle barrels. The Confederates are in position along the banks of 14 Mile Creek to contest their advance. These are Confederate forces led by Colonel Wirt Adams. They're Mississippi cavalrymen. Here we are turning the left. They're in position along 14 Mile Creek, and I'll point out the creek to you in just a moment. The creek is in the wood line immediately in our front.
And George, if you would, as we get up to it, just slow down as we go across the bridge.
Wirt Adams' Confederate cavalrymen are in position on the far side of the creek astride this road. At this point, seeing the Confederates, Sherman will send forward his lead brigade in line of battle, deploy one battery of artillery which will immediately start shelling the shoreline here, the banks of this creek. Here is 14 Mile Creek. Wirt Adams' cavalrymen are on the far side of the stream, concealed in the wood line. There's a bridge at this point as well, and suddenly the bridge goes up in flames as Wirt Adams' cavalrymen set the bridge afire in hopes of destroying it before the Federals can cross. So here's 14 Mile Creek. It's bank full today due to the heavy rains of yesterday. In normal conditions, you can jump across this stream at any point and not get wet. But it is bank full today. It was also rather full on May the 12th. Could not be forded at this point in the presence of the enemy, and so the Federals would have to fight for it.
What time of day was this?
What time of day is this? This will be fairly early in the morning, around 10 o'clock in the morning. And so the battle, the skirmish between Sherman and Wirt Adams will take place here. We'll talk more about that in just a moment at our next stop, which is Dillon Plantation. Dillon Plantation, this is all the grounds around you of Dillon Plantation. The area to your left is federal property, which is part of the Natchez Trace Parkway, which you see running on the ridge line just off to your left. But recently, the National Park Service acquired 470 acres of additional land comprising the Dillon Plantation, including the Dillon farmhouse site, through an exchange of land from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And so now the federal government owns all this land on the left and right, encompassing the skirmish site and the site of Dillon Plantation.
What we do here, just up ahead here, there's cluster buildings on our right. We'll stop there, turn, get out, next to the grants. Probably 60 plus is where we go.
They couldn't get it in the Civil War. I mean, they did a SAG jump. There was more debate. A lot of people don't like it. The Civil War is like you see where they ran. But the draft don't like it. You have to come in and get it. Hate and everything else. So, he said that's vice team.
Folks, we'll get out here and just walk a short distance. This is the site of the Dillon farmhouse.
We get in front of me, Carl?
Yeah, go ahead.
Watch Now folks, here we are again upside down but properly oriented. The Southern Railroad of Mississippi is several miles behind you here, as is the town of Edwards. We are currently at the Dillon Plantation, which is here. We have come from, Auburn at the church where we made the stop, through New Auburn, and are now here at Dillon Plantation on our way to Raymond, which is down the road here several additional miles. Now you recall that once the 13th Corps began its wheeling motion toward the Southern Railroad of Mississippi, elements of the 15th Union Army Corps led by General William Sherman will continue along this road behind us here, heading toward Raymond, while the 17th Corps is pushing up from Utica toward Raymond as well. Now on May the 12th of 1863, Confederate General John Pemberton has discerned Grant's intentions of cutting this railroad, and he is moving his troops into position to try to thwart Grant's attempt. The only natural obstacle that will aid in his defense of the railroad is 14-Mile Creek. And so McPherson, I'll get straight, Pemberton is moving his forces into position to try to block those Federals on a wide front. He will order Confederate General John Gregg and his brigade of combat troops from the Jackson area to move to Raymond and guard that crossing of the Utica Road over 14-Mile Creek. Word Adams's Confederate cavalry will be moved from Raymond along this road behind us to move into a blocking position here on the Dillon Plantation. Then blocking McClernand will be Confederate forces coming out of Edwards and blocking along the line of the creek at this point. So over a broad front there will be clashes on May the 12th as the Federals battle to cross 14-Mile Creek. Over on the left, as Grant is moving down this road, he suddenly hears the sound of firing at Montgomery's Bridge and at Whitaker's Ford, as elements of the 13th Army Corps will get engaged with John Bowen's Confederate division coming out of Edwards. In just a few moments after hearing the sound of firing erupting on his left, he will round that bend in the road just as we did and see the sunlight shining off of musket barrels of the Mississippi cavalrymen posted in the woods off to your right along 14-Mile Creek, and realizes there is going to be a fight there as well. As Sherman is deploying his lead brigade into line of battle and unlimbering his artillery, it's around 10 o'clock in the morning, suddenly the heavy boom of artillery can be heard farther to his right front as James McPherson and his 17th Union Army Corps open up the Battle of Raymond. So all along a broad front, Grant can hear the sound of firing and realize that across his front, his men are having a fight for possession of this creek. Along 14-Mile Creek here on this road, Sherman will deploy one brigade in line of battle and unlimber a battery of artillery. The artillery will open the fray by shelling the banks of 14-Mile Creek, trying to drive the Confederates off. The Union skirmishers will move forward, attempting to discern the exact size of the force in their front and what extent that force covers. They realize that it is a cavalry vedette in this area, and thus the lead brigade will push forward. Realizing that they are no match for this powerful Federal force, this one brigade, and they can see dust clouds kicked up in the distance, indicating the presence of many, many more Federal soldiers, Word Adams's troopers will put up just a short fight, perhaps a half hour, 45 minutes, before they set fire to the bridge and skedaddle from the area. Those troopers will ride back down this road to the very next road and then head on to Edwards. And so on the 14th, Sherman's troops will gain the crossing here at 14-Mile Creek. I think the Federals suffer maybe 3 or 4 fatalities in this skirmish. The Confederates suffered just a few as well. But it's interesting to point out, as the 7th Missouri U.S. Infantry in the lead crosses over this, 26th Missouri crosses over the creek, suddenly one Missourian is seen walking up to the body of a Confederate soldier sprawled in the road and fall to his knees and start crying. It ended up the dead Confederate was this man's brother. So the Civil War, as we all know, is the war where brother fought brother. Missouri, a state of divided sympathy. Throughout the course of this campaign, we will actually see Missourians fighting Missourians in many areas. But this particular man from Missouri found his brother among the Mississippi cavalrymen that day, and he was killed in battle here at 14 Mile Creek. The rest of the day is spent securing the area here and building the bridge. The stream can be forded, but it's impassable for wagons and artillery. Thus, the Union pioneers are immediately placed to work constructing a bridge across 14 Mile Creek at this point. Once the bridge is constructed, and it takes several hours to complete, the Federal force, the 15th Corps, will push over it and bivouac in this area. One division will bivouac at the next intersection, one division here in the immediate vicinity of the Dillon farmhouse. Now, the Dillon farmhouse stood exactly where this building, which stands directly behind me, now stands. W.F. Dillon was quite a popular man in this area. He had migrated to this area many years before the Civil War, I think from the Carolinas. The Dillon family cemetery is directly across the street from us here, back in the woodlines, and it's there where W.F. Dillon is buried today. But the Dillons were pro-Union in their sympathy, and they offered their home to General Grant and to General Sherman. Thus, on the night of May the 12th, the two generals established their headquarters in the house that stood on this point. Grant is anxious to learn how the fighting elsewhere resulted that day. He will send couriers dashing off here to the east, to the west, to find out from John McClernand what happened. He will also send a courier dashing off to the east to ask James McPherson for a full report of the day's activities. Now, the Battle of Raymond is the most severe of the four engagements that take place along the banks of 14 Mile Creek that day. It is a battle that will rage from roughly 10 o'clock in the morning until 4 o'clock in the afternoon. McPherson, however, will be victorious and drive Gregg's lone Confederate brigade from the field. He will report to Grant here at Dillon Plantation that evening. Now, as we'll find out, the fighting that day is severe. James McPherson is initially knocked on his heels, but will recoup, counterattack in the afternoon, and drive the Confederates from the field. This is his first test in battle as a combat officer and as a corps commander, and he is somewhat embarrassed by the day's results. He realized that he had been bested all morning long by an inferior force. Thus, when he reports to Grant that evening, rather than give Grant a factual accounting of the day's activity, he embellishes on the size of the force opposed to him. He simply tells Grant, "I was attacked by lots of ribs." He fails to tell Grant, "But I outnumbered him 3 to 1. And so Grant, based on this intelligence, is led to believe that there is a far greater number of troops in the Jackson area than initially believed. Rather than continue this wheeling motion now to the railroad and then turn west toward Vicksburg and leave a sizable force of unknown strength in his rear, it is at this very point and at this exact location that Grant decides to alter the course of his army's march. And rather than continue northward to get astride the railroad, he now directs his columns onto Jackson. That decision is made at this location on the night of May the 12th. What does that entail for the Army? Well, it entails for McPherson and Sherman then to continue through Raymond toward the capital city. Grant will use McClernand's 13th Army Corps then as a shield to safeguard this operation. As McClernand is on the left, closest to Pemberton's army in the Vicksburg enclave, he will move McClernand's corps into a blocking position on a line roughly, and let me show you on the map here. My maps are falling apart from use. Again, this is how we are oriented. While the two corps under McPherson and Sherman continue through Raymond and Mississippi Springs towards the capital city of Jackson, he will pull McClernand's corps from the point of contact back somewhat, place them on a line from Raymond northward to Bolton, facing in an easterly direction. This will be the shield that will protect the other two corps of his army against Pemberton while they march on Jackson. To do this, McClernand, who is in proximity to the enemy, has been engaged at Montgomery's Bridge and at Whitaker's Ford on May the 12th, now has to disengage in the face of a superior force. That is a tricky undertaking. Very difficult, very hazardous, potentially dangerous. McClernand will pull it off without a hitch. On May the 13th, he will feint an attack against Edwards, pushing the Confederates onto the defensive, and while they fall back on the defensive, he disengages and makes a rapid push here to the vicinity of Dillon's Plantation. And he will come down this very next road we'll see coming in on our left, and he will bivouac in this vicinity then on the night of May the 13th. So McClernand again shines here on May the 12th and May the 13th. From this point on May the 13th, Grant and Sherman's Corps will continue pushing then into Raymond, and we'll move into Raymond that night and on toward Mississippi Springs. And so we will follow along the route of advance of Sherman and Grant between here and Raymond. Once we get to Raymond, we'll talk about the 17th Army Corps and of course the battle on the actual site. Any questions at this point?
How far? I'm sorry, go ahead. How far are we from Jackson?
How far are we from Jackson? At this point, we are about 10 miles from Raymond, which is about 9 miles from Jackson.
What about the Natchez Trace?
The Natchez Trace is the road directly behind you here. The Natchez Trace is a unit of the National Park system. It commemorates a historic Indian/pioneering road that connected Natchez in Spanish-held territory at that point in time with Nashville. And what would happen is these flat boatmen, because this is before the age of steam, these flat boatmen would move down the Cumberland, the Tennessee, the Ohio, various other rivers that flow through Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, with all their agricultural goods down to Spanish-held Natchez. There they would sell their goods. Being unable to come back upriver, they would also sell their flatboats, which would be used for building materials for houses. They would then walk back along this trace, known as the Natchez Trace, to their respective homes. Well, the Natchez Trace Parkway, now a unit of the National Park Service, is a very narrow corridor, but a very scenic one, mind you, all the way from Natchez, Mississippi to Nashville, Tennessee. The area on the other side of the road from you here is part of the Natchez Trace Parkway. The area we are now standing on was originally land owned or operated by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the Farm Service Agency. They leased this property out to a family known as Bailey, and so in the local area this is known as the Bailey Farm, and if you look across the way you'll see the big blue silo. It says Bailey Farm on it. Well, the Bailey family leased this property for several years. Unfortunately for them, they accrued more than $3 million in debt in their farming processes, and just last year the Farm Service Administration foreclosed on the lease. With having experienced so much trouble with the lease on this property, the Farm Service Agency declared this surplus government property, and we're in the process of putting it up for sale. One of their appraisers in Washington, who originally was from Mississippi, realized that this area is in the heart of the Vicksburg Campaign area. And so she called me and asked if there was any significance to this property. And so I told her about the fight along 14 Mile Creek. I told her about the Dillon farmhouse and the decision that was made here on the night of May the 12th. This is a very bold decision. This is a defining moment in the Vicksburg Campaign, because by marching on Jackson, Grant's army will scatter to the four winds all of the relief forces that are moving into Mississippi. Scattering those relief forces under Joseph Johnston to the four winds almost guarantees him success in the siege of Vicksburg. So again, this is a defining moment of the Vicksburg Campaign when Grant makes that decision to march on Jackson. And so with all that in mind, she says, wow, we ought to keep this property under federal control. And so she and I and others in our respective agencies got the ball rolling. We worked with the Mississippi Department of Archives and History, which concurred in our estimate that this needs to be retained under federal ownership. And so just a few months ago in January, on January 9th, the date that Mississippi seceded from the Union, the Assistant Secretary of Agriculture came here to Mississippi along with the Assistant Secretary of Interior and the Director of the National Park Service, and we had a formal ceremony transferring the deed of this property over to the National Park Service. Now, although it is associated with the Vicksburg Campaign, Vicksburg National Military Park had no legislative authority to acquire this parcel, even through transfer or donation. But the Natchez Trace Parkway, immediately adjacent to it, did. As a result, the Natchez Trace Parkway agreed to accept title to this property, and the Natchez Trace Parkway and Vicksburg National Military Park are working very closely with one another for interpretation of this property. And so the first thing, all the hazardous material investigations have been completed. Hazardous materials, farm chemicals, old tires, things of that nature have been removed from the property. The next stage is to remove all these modern structures, do some archaeology to locate the exact location of the Dillon farmhouse, establish walking trails that will come over from a pull-off on the Natchez Trace, past the Dillon family cemetery, across the road, all the way down to 14 Mile Creek, and talk about the activities that took place here during the Vicksburg Campaign. We're also working with the Blue and Gray Education Society. Many of you are familiar with that organization led by Lynn Rydell. He has volunteered to put up 14 interpretive markers on Raymond battlefield and has offered to put up interpretive markers here at the Dillon site as well. So hopefully over the next few years, through this private-public partnership, we will be able to fully develop this site as a key component along the Vicksburg Campaign Trail.
Well, Grant could use it in the campaign. What was the significance? Was there any significance of the trace here?
Was there any significance to the trace? No. By the time of the American Civil War, the Natchez Trace had fallen, it had become an abandoned road for all intents and purposes. Now there are some portions of the trace that were utilized by the Union Army in its inland push, but it plays virtually no role other than for movement of troops. Okay, and that's on a very limited basis at that.
So that wasn't a problem?
No, not at all. Not at all. Yes, sir.
What was the history of the Dillon family rivalries for the North?
The Dillon family were actually migrants from either farther east or north, but pro-Union in their sympathy. Yes, sir.
Did Grant ever find out that McPherson kind of fudged on the people in front of him?
After the fact, but Grant, of course, did not reprimand or chide McPherson for it whatsoever, and Grant, of course, makes no mention of it in his memoirs either. As we mentioned, Grant took care of his friends. He took care of the people he liked, and he really liked James McPherson. Now, McPherson, as many of you know, you've seen pictures of the gentleman. He was highly regarded as perhaps the most handsome man in the Union Army. He had a wonderful personality. He was very jovial, very friendly, always smiled, he laughed a lot. He was a good person to be in his company. He made you feel good. And you ask Ed Bars, for example, Ed, what led to McPherson's meteoric rise through the ranks? What qualified him for such high command? And Ed's only answer is, he was a likable fellow. He was a likable fellow. Okay, folks, let's reboard the bus and head on to Raymond.
The original Natchez Trace Parkway is the road, the Natchez Trace is the road we are currently on. Historically, it started veering off to our left right around this point, and if you go onto the land of the Natchez Trace, the Dillon family cemetery is just off to our left. It's actually on the historic roadbed of the Natchez Trace, and you can see a beautiful stretch of it on federal property here to our left. On your left, you'll note a gate here in just a few moments. That's how the Park Service accesses the cemetery for cutting the grass. There's the gate. The cemetery is just at the end of that little grassy path. This is the road McClernand would use. After he disengages on May the 13th, he comes down this road on our left, then takes up the line of march just as we are following today. We're going to follow this road into the village of Raymond. Before we go out to the battlefield, we're going to go into the village itself. We'll stop there near the courthouse, the Hinds County Courthouse built by the Weldon brothers, the same fellows who built the courthouse in Vicksburg where you were last night. We'll pause there for a few moments. There are restroom facilities inside, and I would encourage anyone who needs to use them to please do so. They're about the only restrooms we'll see today on the course of our travels. There's also the Confederate monument in front of the courthouse. Now, Confederate General John Gregg would use the cupola of that courthouse as his observation post early in the day on the morning of May 12th in the Battle of Raymond.
Terry, how many miles away is Pemberton's Ellison House where he set up
I'm sorry?
headquarters? Where Ellison House?
The Ellison House. I've been asked how far away is Pemberton's Ellison House headquarters. Now, Pemberton does not use the Ellison House as his headquarters until the night of May the 15th, which is 3 days after the events that we've been talking about. That's off to your left, probably about 8 miles. About 8 miles. Well, we have a few moments here. I've been asked to talk about artillery, and don't worry, I won't tell my bad joke again today. But Civil War artillery is in a remarkable period of transition, going from smoothbore weapons to rifled artillery. Rifled artillery, just like rifled muskets, had grooves, rifling grooves in the barrel that would put a spin on the projectile, and much like a quarterback throwing a pass who wants to put a spin on it to give it greater velocity, greater accuracy, greater distance, the same would hold true on rifled artillery. It takes artillery, which as a smoothbore has a maximum range of about a mile. Rifled artillery will have a maximum range of about 3 miles